You're listening to the VSL Aviation Podcast. I'm your host, Seth Lake. Thanks for being here. If you're joining us on YouTube or Twitch, welcome. We are live streaming this. This is primarily on Discord, though. We've got a great Discord community, and you can join us live for this each week. And I do some pre-recorded shows and do some live shows. So if you want to hop on here and ask your questions, you can do that. If you're joining us on YouTube, you can just type your questions out, and I'll introduce John here in a moment. He'll jump on and read those questions out to me, so we'll be able to answer them when the time comes. So this is our weekly installment of the VSL show, and so I'm basically a designated pilot examiner and a flight instructor. So if you have any general aviation or even commercial aviation questions, you can send them my way, and I'm here to basically help you learn the regulations better, prepare for check rides, and just be more confident when you're going in and acting as pilot in command of that airplane that you're learning how to fly. So we really appreciate you joining us here. So this week, I'm going to cover a few topics and then open it up for questions. We're going to try to keep it right at an hour this time. We'll see how well I do on that. But we're going to get started with our first topic, and that's networking with the FAASTeam. And it's really just going to be a primer for you to learn about the FAASTeam and how you can get involved with that. So what the FAASTeam is, I'm going to pull the website up here. If you're listening to the podcast, I try to do my best to make sure that I explain everything so you can follow along in the audio format. But I am going to use the FAA Safety Team website. So if you're joining us on YouTube, you'll be able to follow along on that. So to find that, just search the VSL Aviation channel on YouTube, and that YouTube channel will pop up. So like and subscribe that. All right, so here is the FAA Safety Team's website. Now, the first thing I'd like to get out of the way is the website is not that great, and we all understand that, we being the volunteers that work on the FAA Safety Team. So I'll just get that out of the way. It's not a great website. We've tried to make things as better as possible, but at the end of the day, it is a little bit difficult to work with. But don't let that stop you, because it's still a really good program. So what the FAASTeam is it's a group of volunteers, and there are also some full-time FAA employees that help manage the program, but primarily it's staffed by volunteers like myself. And we do a few different things. In fact, you can go over here to activities, courses, seminars, and webinars. Those are really the meat and potatoes of what the FAASTeam does. So we either conduct courses or seminars and webinars. Those are live events. In fact, I just did one last night at the North Little Rock Airport where we talked about ForeFlight for about an hour and a half and answered some questions there. We had dinner. There was about 50 people there, so it was a good turnout. And we do that every month, and that's something that we do in the state of Arkansas. So that would be a seminar. Webinars, we'll just navigate to the webinars right now. It pulls up a map of the United States, and we can search for show-only webinars. We're going to select that option when you click on webinars. You'll select show-only webinars, and then just hit search, because webinars aren't limited to a state, right? You can take those anywhere you're at, and a lot of these are conducted on Zoom. I'm looking to try to conduct some actually on Discord. I think Discord would be a really cool platform to do webinars on, but we can see right here immediately we've got 3/11/25, which is today. So March 11th, 2025 at 7 o'clock Eastern, there's a risk-based flight review. And we could scroll down here. We've got tons of webinars, and scrolling all the way down here, I'm not counting all of these. I'm guessing there's around 50 between now and April 16th, it looks like. So those webinars are conducted by volunteers, and they sit down at their computer like I'm doing right now, and they have a topic that's prepared, and they go through the slideshow. They usually open it up for some sort of questions towards the end, kind of similar to this program. And then you'll get Wings credit. So by attending this, you get credit for that through Wings credit. We'll go over that in just a second. So that's an example of what a webinar would look like. Now, let's say you want to attend a live seminar. So a live seminar, then you're going to click on the state where you're located at. So let's assume that we're maybe in, I don't know, we'll do Indiana. So you're a pilot in Indiana, and you want to meet other pilots in Indiana. Maybe you want to kind of branch out from your flight school, meet some new instructors, whatever. It looks like I clicked on Indiana, and sure enough, on the 15th of March, they have a risk-based flight review and wings program. And this is at Zionsville, Indiana, and there's 12 seats remaining. Now, it gives me the distance from where I'm at as far as what my programmed zip code is in the FAASTeam website. So to create an account here is free, and so it knows my zip code, and so it's just calculating the distance there. So if I wanted to go to that, I could click on that program, and it's going to pull up the program details, including kind of a brief description of what we're talking about, who's conducting the seminar, and then directions on how to get there and anything you need to do as far as RSVP. There might be details if there's dinner available, if there's a cost to that, where you're going to park, stuff like that. So that's what a seminar looks like, a wing seminar. Now, that wing seminar, more than likely, I don't know this one for sure, but it looks like Dennis Miller, he's a CFI and 2023 National FAASTeam Representative of the Year. So that's a national award. So Dennis, I don't know him personally, but I'm sure he's going to put on a really good program. Obviously, a nationally recognized instructor like that, that's pretty cool to be able to sit down and meet them face to face and see what they have to say about, in this case, risk-based flight review and the wings program. All right, so that's seminars and webinars. There's also courses, and courses, we're just going to click on the available courses. There's hundreds of courses available. Now, in the most recent version 6.5 of the ACE Guide, I put in some specific wings courses that I think are really good. It's not to say that there's not a ton of wings courses that are in here that are really good. You can find basically anything that you want to find in regards to general aviation on these courses. And some of these courses are just recorded webinars or recorded seminars, and we take those, we put them in video format, we upload them, and then we put like a 30 or 40 question quiz with them. So you take that quiz to verify that you did indeed watch the material, and you get wings credit after that. So that's the courses. And then we have activities. Now, activities are things that you're going to do primarily in flight. So you're going to have flight activities. And the flight activities, there's a keyword that we can search here. We can also just say we just want to see wings activities at the basic level for Flight 1. So that's how we're going to drill down here. And again, if you're listening, we're just going to go to the main page, the FAASafety.gov website, click activities, and then you'll see all these dialogues for wings, basic, and Flight 1. That's what we want to do. And we perform a search, and it's going to pull up all of the activities that get me credit for Flight 1. And as you can see, there's tons of activities. I say tons, there's literally hundreds, at least dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of activities that we can do here. So some of these activities include multiple credits. So for instance, we have this Farmingdale State College instructor training and standardization in a PA 44-180. So that's the title of this activity. That sounds like a pretty advanced course, and it sounds like you need to be at Farmingdale State College in order to do that. So that's a great example of not all the activities in here that you're necessarily eligible to take, but some of the more generic ones you could take just with you and an instructor. So we'll look at this one right here, which is airplane single engine land takeoffs, climbs, and approaches. So that has an activity number. It's a public activity, so anyone can do this with a qualified instructor on board, and you can go out and take this activity, and it counts for 1 credit towards your Flight 1. And you can kind of see here, we're going to look at our wings grade sheet here in a second, but the wings levels actually include 3 knowledge topics and 3 flight activities. So you would need to complete all 6 of those combined activities to get credit for wings. Now to show you what what a wings kind of logbook looks like, when you go to the home page, you're going to click on My Wings, and it'll pull up my most recent phase of wings that I've done. And we're just going to take a look at that. So I'm on phase 13 of wings for basic. And so there's my certificate of proficiency saying that I accomplished it, and then my certificate of a flight review and completing the wings. This is kind of interesting as an instructor. If you're using wings, it's actually printing out the flight review sticker. So it's doing some of the paperwork for you, which I think is really valuable. The other thing as an instructor is if you do 15 flight activities with at least 5 different people, then that will count as a reinstatement event, or not a reinstatement, a renewal or recent experience, I guess is the most proper verbiage that we're using right now as instructors, is your recent experience, 15 activities with 5 different people. All right, so that's kind of a real brief primer of what wings is. And what we're doing is we're using it to encourage proficiency in the general aviation pilot fleet. So how can you be involved in this as an instructor or just a pilot? So the way to actually do this is all on the website here. So if you go to the main page, the first thing you're going to want to do, if you haven't already, is you're going to want to create a Wings profile. So you're going to have to create an account here, essentially. That's the first thing that you want to do. Then the next thing that you want to do is you want to go to your FAASTeam directory. So your FAASTeam directory is going to pull up that same picture of the United States that we saw, that map, and we're going to still go with that pilot in Indiana that's wanting to use Wings as a networking opportunity, a way to volunteer, give back to the community, all that good stuff. So we're going to click on Indiana. And what this is going to do is it's going to pull up all of the FAASTeam representatives in the state of Indiana. And it's going to filter them by their responsibility. So the person that we want to talk to in order to get involved in the Wings program for this state would be one of the lead representatives. So we can see right here we've got a couple of lead representatives that are listed, and if we click on those individuals, it will pull up a picture of them as well as a phone number that you can call. I'll go back here because I don't know that, this is public information, but I don't know if they want it broadcast on YouTube necessarily. So we have, looks like Mr. Craig Brown is a FAASTeam lead representative in the state of Indiana. And it shows some of his recent training experience that you have. So you want to make sure that whoever you're calling has done the training recently, so you know that they're still active, because this is a website run by the government and it might be a little out of date. But that's the first place that I would go to if I wanted to get involved in the Wings program for a specific state. So that's pretty straightforward. Now, and I'm not going to give a tutorial right now, but in this website is actually where you would go. You would fill out the application to become a FAASTeam representative. And so let's talk about what a FAASTeam representative is meant to do, or kind of your roles and responsibilities. Really, you're part of a safety management system. Right, a safety management system includes all these different pillars. Maybe that'd be a good topic for another episode, but one of the pillars of, and a really important one, is safety messaging. So any safety management system is going to have messaging, basically some form to tell people to be safe. And that means more than just saying, hey, you out there, when you go fly, be safe. That means doing things like seminars and webinars where you talk about meaningful either proficiency items or safety items. Like last night's seminar, we talked about weather avoidance and how you can leverage ForeFlight to avoid weather. I thought it was a really good topic, and I thought it was pretty appropriate going into the spring months where we tend to have more kind of active weather systems in the state of or in our region anyway. So that's an example of, okay, I'm a Wings FAASTeam representative. I wanted to go out and spread safety messaging to the fellow pilots. And so that's how we do that, is through the FAA Safety Team. So that's your primary responsibility, is that safety messaging. And you're primarily going to do that through webinars and seminars. Now, when I put on a seminar, there's a lot that goes into that, right? There's the basic venue planning, right? I need somebody to have a place to do it, and tables and chairs and kind of the administrative stuff. I need an audio visual system set up for a speaker and, a mic and all that. And either I need to bring that, or I need to coordinate with another representative that's going to help me with that. At our seminar, we actually do a dinner as well. So I actually work hand in hand with the local EAA chapter, and they're the ones that cook the dinner, and you pay for the dinner, and that goes to help their organization in the EAA. And then we put on the safety program. And we invite people from all over the state to do different safety programs. So it's not just me talking every month. In fact, next month we have another examiner that's covering non-towered operations. And then in May, we're having the FAA controllers from the local TRACON come to give a presentation about kind of controller-pilot forum or relations of what they're seeing as far as pilot deviations go and anything like that from the controller side. So those are just some examples of what we're doing there. So all that takes teamwork. You need multiple people working different angles, and so that's all run by the FAA Safety Team. One of the other responsibilities that you might have to do is airman counseling. So we have a forum on the FAA Safety Team website where we can go in and we can conduct airman counseling. And so how that would look is if you went out and you had a bad day in aviation, let's say you had some sort of pilot deviation, I would be assigned to you as a safety team representative, and I would maybe do a ground lesson about runway incursion avoidance. We may even go out and do some sort of flight, and that would be some sort of, the FAA would label that as remedial training. And then instead of a certificate action where we're actually coming in and, or not we, but the FAA is coming in and suspending your certificate or something bad like that. Instead, what we're doing is we're trying to provide you with the remedial training needed to make sure that that doesn't happen again. And I think that's a really good philosophy that the FAA has embraced over the past, I'd say, 10 to 15 years. Instead of enforcement actions, they're wanting you to comply. So let's bring the airman back into compliance instead of drop the hammer of enforcement on that airman. So those are some responsibilities you'd be doing on the FAASTeam. It's a great volunteer opportunity. And if you're out there, looking for an aviation job and you're wanting to, I see people on Reddit talk about how they want to build a resume, right? Say Delta Airlines wants to see a lot of extracurricular activity or volunteer or community activity out there. The Wings program is kind of a no-brainer, right? If you're a pilot, especially a CFI, that's a great way to get involved with a volunteer organization where you're spreading safety information, you're helping conduct these safety seminars, you're helping keep airmen safe by kind of operating that FAA's safety management system. So anyway, that was a topic I wanted to bring up because I think the Wings program is really good and you should get involved in that. So next, and if you got any questions on that, we can talk about that in the question and answer time. So next let's talk about, I'm going to jump ahead to the Reddit post that I saw. So this Reddit post, I'll pull this up. This Reddit post was about, the title of it here is potentially hundreds of hours of invalid flight time. And this sounds pretty scary because this pilot is basically saying, hey, they have a friend and they worked at some sort of flying operation, eventually moved on to the airlines. And when they got to the airlines were doing a review of their logbook and essentially discovered that a lot of the hours that the pilot had logged at his former operator were not valid hours because he logged a lot of SIC time. SIC hours can only be logged when a very specific set of circumstances are in place. So one of those would be you're in an aircraft that requires two pilots. That's essentially the main thing that needs to happen is you're in an aircraft that requires two pilots. Well, in this pilot's circumstance, he was in a plane that only required one pilot. Now, that is not a deal breaker. Sometimes a Part 135 operator specifically can ask the FAA to have basically a pilot development program in place. And this is a way for them to legitimately grow pilot in command operators, right? They want to take an SIC, a young pilot with not very much experience, allow them to log SIC time, kind of mentor them so they can eventually upgrade and move over to the left seat. But they're doing it in a plane that only requires a single pilot. So a great example of this, and I think this might have been what the operator was flying, is a PC-12. So a PC-12 is a single pilot certified aircraft, meaning that the manufacturer built it to be flown by one pilot. So the FAA says, nope, you can't log SIC time in a PC-12 in most cases because it only requires one pilot. So this operator apparently had been telling all of its employees that, hey, you can go out and log SIC time because we've gotten this program developed by the FAA and approved by the FAA of this mentorship program. And instead of doing the fact checking and getting the actual documentation, instead of doing the fact checking and making sure that that was indeed the case, the pilots just went ahead and started logging SIC time. They put all this SIC time in their logbook, then used it to qualify for a job, got to the job, and that employer is the one that actually did the research and said, okay, you're logging all this SIC time in a PC-12. That means we need to see this approved mentorship program for the Part 135 certificate holder. And the 135 certificate holder couldn't produce that. And so now the new employer is like, well, then we have to throw all of this SIC time out. So with that deducted from your training experience or flying experience, you no longer qualify for this job. So we're going to retract that CJO that we just gave you. So obviously that's pretty devastating, right? You've worked really hard for years to get all this experience, And then basically you can't use that experience. It's not legal anymore. In, I think, last week's episode, or maybe the episode before that, we talked about a Part 135 operator that, was a legitimate 135 operator, but could basically make you participate in an illegal charter because they know that you don't know the regs very well, and they may ask you to fly an airplane that isn't on the 135 certificate. So you're working for a legitimate 135 operator, and you're flying an aircraft that you were trained on, but since that airplane was kind of sped through the process and the I's weren't dotted, the T's weren't crossed, that's not a legal charter anymore. And guess what? If you get in some sort of accident or you get ramp inspected, then that's going to be on you as the pilot in command. So this is just another example of how you as the pilot in command, you can't take any of this stuff for granted. Either that you have ignorant operators that just don't know the rules properly, or you have operators that are willfully kind of trying to cut corners and just hoping that, hey, I've got a hungry pilot out there that's happy for the paycheck that's probably not going to ask a bunch of questions, so I can pull one over on them. I'm not saying that all operators are like that, but I really want my commercial pilots, my CFIs that are listening, to do your homework on your operator. If they tell you something, ask for the documentation. All of this is highly regulated. And so the moral of the story is, when your operator tells you something, you need to see, hey, is that in the GOM? Is that in the op specs? I want a signed piece of paper proving to me that this operation you're wanting me to do is actually legitimate. This is legal. And that's on you as the pilot in command, because at the end of the day, it's your logbook, right? It's your certificate on the line. So you need to make sure that you're doing your due diligence there. So anyway, I thought that was a good opportunity to beat that drum again of, I'm not saying that there's just a rash of employers out there that are doing bad things, but there are a few out there, and you need to keep your eye out for them. All right, I'm going to take a little break from talking real quick and let John introduce himself. John, would you like to say hi to the folks?
Hello, everyone. I am John. I am a CFI out of Rhode Island. I'm helping out Seth with his podcasts and his content that he creates. He's doing a great job. So if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat, and I'll read them out on the show for you.
Thanks, John. We actually got to meet up last week. I had an overnight up in the Northeast, and we were able to, the stars aligned, and he was available, I was available. So we got to actually, I don't know how many Discorders actually do live meetups. I feel like that doesn't happen that often. We're all just virtual. But it was good to see you, John. I appreciate you making the time to meet up. That's cool.
Of course. It was a great time.
All right. What's on the docket now? SDRs. Actually, we'll wait SDRs last. We're going to talk about airspace and why it's important. Okay, the reason I wanted to pull up ForeFlight here, and for those of y'all listening, I've just got ForeFlight pulled up, mainly because we're going to look at some airspace. And this came up in a recent DPE meeting. I've had a few DPE meetings recently. I had my national recurrent, and then I had our state recurrent training. And it's always an interesting time to get together with other examiners, because we do kind of operate a little bit in a vacuum. We're not interacting with one another a lot. I've got kind of a group of examiners that I'll bounce questions off of from time to time. But for the most part, we're out there doing a check ride by ourselves, and the next day we're doing our other job or more check rides, and we don't get a lot of interaction. So this once a year when we get together and we all can kind of talk and compare notes, it's interesting to hear other people's take on this. And some of the other examiners were stating that they saw a common trend of people really not understanding airspace that well. And they were basically thinking that this might be because people don't fundamentally understand why we have airspace, which I thought was kind of an interesting statement, because I think I've noticed that as well. Where when I start asking about airspace, the applicant has memorized the little pyramid from the King School or something. They know all the G, the E, the B, C, all that stuff. They know all the airspaces, and they've got it kind of memorized. But remember, thinking as an instructor, that rote memorization of airspace, that's like the lowest level of learning. We really want to have that fundamental understanding. And I think in order to gain that, you have to know, well, why is airspace important? Like, why do I care about that? And I think that's a good question to ask as a CFI for your private pilot student or your student pilot, somebody that's just learning how to fly. Use that law of primacy, and when you're teaching airspace, get into the why behind that. So let's talk about that for a second, because I think it's kind of interesting. So I've got a map here pulled up. I'm going to turn off all my ForeFlight layers so I get a nice clean screen. Probably should have done that before. And we're going to zoom in. Let's do Kansas. I feel like Kansas is a good place. So here in Kansas, we're going to pull up a sectional chart, and I'm in northern Kansas. And if you want to follow along here, I'm at KPHG. So KPHG, Phillipsburg Municipal. It's a little airport in northern Kansas. And by looking at the sectional, it's got the shaded magenta line. And so I might ask an applicant, well, what does that indicate? And the correct answer is, well, that indicates that class Echo goes a little bit closer to the surface in that shaded magenta area than normal, right? Normally it goes down to 1,200 feet. And in a shaded magenta area, it goes down to 700 feet. And so my next question might be, well, why? Why does it do that? And a lot of applicants will kind of scratch their head there. They'll think of some reason, but very rarely do I think they give the correct answer. And the correct answer is the whole reason we have airspace is to keep VFR traffic away from IFR traffic. And that's kind of the whole point of our airspace. So that's the big overarching reason there. And so as a private pilot or a student pilot, if I'm thinking about that means that the airspace is meant to keep me away from the people that are in the clouds, okay? So if I'm doing an approach into Phillipsburg Municipal here, I know that even if the weather is pretty low, there might be somebody in the pattern there, right? I need to know that as an instrument pilot. And as a VFR pilot, I need to know that, okay, if I'm operating at Phillipsburg and the weather is, let's say it's marginal VFR, and the ceiling's around 3,000 feet, and I'm up there doing pattern work, and I decide to cross the pattern at 500 feet above pattern altitude. So now I'm 1,500 feet. I'm only 1,500 feet below the clouds there, and this jet could be coming in, and that's at a pretty high descent rate. And imagine the jet popping out of the clouds and seeing a plane right in front of them. That would be a bad thing. So I need to stay far enough away from the bottom of those clouds to avoid that. So that's why we have cloud clearances, right? Cloud clearances are to make sure that when that IFR plane pops out of the clouds, they've got enough time to react to not hit the little VFR airplane that's not in the clouds. So that's why we want to keep our distance away from clouds. So that whole, 500, 1,000, 2,000, the visibility, all that stuff that you memorize, that's the why behind it. So I think that's really important to understand there, right? But now let's think about it in terms of an IFR pilot. So I'm an IFR pilot, and I'm flying in to Phillipsburg Municipal. Now let's say I'm given a check ride here. And I asked the applicant who's taken their IFR exam, the weather at Phillipsburg is 500-foot overcast. So you would have a red, if you were looking at the METAR board or the surface condition there, it would have a red little circle on it. And you tap on the METAR and you see that it's 500-foot broken layer, and that the visibility is, let's say it's 6 miles. So visibility is not bad, but the ceiling's obviously IFR, so you have to file an IFR. Not only that, you have to have an alternate even. And so now you're doing an approach into this field that's 500 foot overcast. I might ask you, could there be VFR traffic in the pattern legally? And of course, everybody immediately thinks, oh, well, not legally. Or they think, well, there could be, but, nobody in their right mind would be flying in 500-foot overcast. But that brings up the question, and they have to kind of dig back in the cobwebs of their private pilot or student pilot days of, okay, well, what airspace, if there was an airplane that was legal, what airspace would they be in? And of course, the correct answer is Class G airspace, because Class G, the Class E airspace here at Phillipsburg, doesn't go to the surface. It only goes to 700 feet. So there could be an airplane that's operating legally in Class G, because the cloud clearance requirements for Class G are 1 mile clear of clouds, right? So as long as they're clear of the clouds and they've got 1 mile visibility, and they do, they could be operating legally in the pattern at that airport. And so now we've got this problem, right? We're doing an approach and we pop out of the approach, and then all of a sudden we see traffic that's there. Now, what kind of traffic would be operating there? I think two really come to mind. One of those would be an agricultural operation. So if you had an ag sprayer, somebody that's out there doing, or an ag applicator, a crop duster, a common name. So if you had an ag applicator that's out there flying, they might be flying in significantly lower ceilings than you or I fly at normally in a training environment, but they're seldom getting above 50 feet. They're operating more like a helicopter. And that is the second type of operator that might be in the pattern there at Phillipsburg while we're doing our approach, is there might be a helicopter that's operating legally in VFR conditions in Class G airspace. And so we don't need to take that for granted, right? We need to understand that, hey, even though the weather is what we would consider poor, it's good enough for there to be VFR operations be happening at that field, especially when you throw in a lot of bag operators and a lot of helicopter operators. Those are typically our users of the national airspace that are really taking advantage or spending a lot of time in Class G airspace. So anytime, kind of to bring this back to an actual point, is anytime you're out there flying and you're learning airspace, you want to look at the airspace you're going to and you want to see, hey, is there Class E to the surface? So let's find one that's Class E to the surface. I'm going to search around here. The way we can tell there's Class E to the surface is it has that dashed solid magenta line instead of the shaded magenta line. And so right here we've got Renner Field in Goodland, Kansas is Class Echo to the surface. And it's also not a perfect circle. It has a little bit of a circle with a little kind of, it's a key shape, and that key opens up to the southeast of the field. So what we can also assume here is that there's probably some sort of procedure that comes in from the southeast, right? And so we could pull up maybe this ILS, and sure enough, the ILS extends down, that's to runway 30. So it starts the southeast of the field and goes to the northwest. So that key outlet, we could overlay that on our map. So that key opens up, and that's what protects that IFR traffic from now Class Echo. So you have those cloud clearance requirements. It's not just 1 mile clear clouds. You have the clearance requirements to avoid a collision all the way down to the surface. So now we didn't just have an applicant memorize what airspace was, or if you're just watching this as a student, now you kind of know the why behind that. And I think it helps you have a better fundamental understanding. And instead of that rote memorization, you actually know the why, and now you know the regs better, and it's going to help make you a safer pilot. So I just wanted to bring that up because I think it's a common thing that's missed on the ground eval, is not knowing why the airspace is constructed like it is. Okay, and last but not least, we are going to talk about service difficulty reports, SDRs. It's going to be the last topic for tonight, and then we'll open it up for questions. On the podcast version, I know the screen share isn't that useful, but you can just remember if you're sitting at the treadmill, just remember, hey, SDR, that's what you're going to type into the Google machine, and it'll take you directly to this website that I have pulled up here. So what is a service difficulty report? An SDR is a way for users in aviation to report problems that they've had with an aircraft. And the reason this came up in our local FAA meeting is that we are having a lot of issues with flight controls, believe it or not. We've had several flight control problems, and we are messaging to all the maintainers out there, all the AMTs, that if they're working on an airplane and they notice any flight control problems like frayed cables or corrosion that's developed underneath safety wires or turnbuckles, we're asking them to fill out a service difficulty report, because what that does is those SDRs get consolidated at the FAA level, and if there are enough SDRs for a specific thing, that would allow the FAA to issue an NPRM for a airworthiness directive, or it may even warrant an emergency airworthiness directive if there's enough of these SDRs. So for those of you who are AMTs, or if you're an aircraft owner or operator or renter, and you just know that, hey, we keep having X, Y, or Z problem a lot, You may want to ask your AMT about, hey, have they filed an SDR? The process is pretty straightforward. You follow the process here on the website. It's actually one of the good websites on the FAA, so it has an explanation of how the safety difficulty reporting system works and what processes you need to follow in order to file an SDR. But it's a really good way for us as a community to track the safety trends, and it makes everybody safer, because if we're having a problem with control cables here in Arkansas, I bet that there's other FSDOs that are having the same issue, and this may be a national problem, and who knows what caused it, but unless we consolidate these and track them and start turning the metrics into actionable data, we just won't know. And so the way we go about doing that is with these SDRs. So if you're running into those issues, especially control cables, ask your AMT about filing an SDR. All right, those are my topics for this week. Again, trying to keep it under an hour, but I got time for some questions. John, do we got anybody? And if you're in the Discord with us, there's not many people here tonight, but you can raise your hand there and you can come on and talk live on the show.
Can a student pilot log PIC time with an instructor on board if they have a solo endorsement? And if so, how does that play into 6165 golf?
Okay, so I would say I don't like to make blanket statements because there probably is some carve-outs here, but for the most part, no. A student pilot may not log IC time before they are rated, and the one exception is when they're taking your private pilot check ride, because there's a specific allowance in the FARs that say when you're sitting for your practical test, even though you aren't qualified, you've met all the qualification criteria, the examiner doesn't count as an instructor and the examiner is not a passenger, therefore you can log PIC time. That's the first time you should be putting PIC time in your logbook when someone else was on the airplane. So that's a simple way to think about that. If you're a student pilot and you're putting PIC time in your logbook and there's someone else on the airplane, you're doing it wrong. Make sure you're not doing that. So yeah, what could cause the confusion is the sole manipulator rule, right? Where you hear, hey, if I'm the sole manipulator of the controls, I can log PIC time. Well, that's only if you're properly rated for the airplane. And an endorsement does not count as a rating. So there's no way that you could be a student pilot and rated for a single engine land aircraft. Therefore, you could not log PIC time even though you're the sole manipulator. If you're properly rated for the airplane, and an endorsement does not count as a rating, so there's no way that you could be a student pilot and rated for a single engine land aircraft. Therefore, you could not log PIC time even though you're the sole manipulator. And then you wouldn't be able to use that time towards 60 for your instrument time either. Now, I think the second part of your question may be a little more nuanced is, and correct me if I'm wrong here, John, but he was asking how he could basically log time he did as a student pilot towards his instrument rating. Was that part of the question?
No, he's specifically asking about 6165 golf, which is the combined private pilot instrument rating.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I would have to pull that one up. I'm not knowledgeable enough on the combined rating. The combined rating is a different beast. I remember the first time I went through DPE training, the people running the training had only ever looked at 2 of those applications the whole time they'd been in the FAA. Like, it is an exceedingly rare thing to do. So I'm not going to speculate on that. I would have to dig into the FARs on that combined rating. But yeah, there is a way that you can take, that's really the only combined check ride that there is in the FAA. There's a combined private pilot and instrument rating, but that doesn't change any of the rules as far as logging PIC time. So all of the instrument time that you would be getting for that double rating when you had a CFII on board, that wouldn't be PIC time. So the only way to log PIC time would be to do it solo.
Evan Haug, YouTube, wants to know what you would do if you can't get, or you couldn't get a CFI check ride in the local area, and whether you'd travel.
Yeah, I would recommend traveling if you can. You know, it's difficult. Man, I get these questions all the time, and I'm sorry if somebody's watching here and I haven't answered their email. I get a lot of emails every single day asking for check rides, and I probably need like some sort of AI assistant to just send out a blanket statement saying, hey, I'm just busy. I'll get to you when I can get to you. The weather's been really bad. Yeah, I've got a ton of excuses. So, but yeah, I really empathize with you trying to get a CFI ride. One of the problems is there's not that many examiners. Not all examiners can give the CFI Checkride, so that's one of the least number of examiners we have is for CFI initials. The other problem is CFI initials take up a lot of time, and in the shortage that we're in, right, we have it, and I call it a shortage because that's what everybody else is calling it, but what it really is the spike of demand that we're seeing right now. We're busy giving a lot of these other check rides, and we just don't have time to do a CFI. And it actually turns in, there's a little bit of monetary here as we lose money doing a CFI exam, because I can do 2 or even 3 regular check rides, but I can only do 1 CFI. And so if I choose to go out and do 1 CFI exam, I might be losing, a significant amount of money. And if I'm doing this as a side job or my primary, it doesn't really matter, that it's competing with my other sources of income. And so because it takes so long, you can only do 1. It's kind of a stressful check ride for both ends, for both you and us. It's just, we don't do them a lot. I don't do that many. I know that's not a great answer. I wish I had a better answer for you. But the best thing I would recommend is use the DMS search function, find a CFI. And if you don't, I've got the screen share pulled up, so let's look at that, and I'll actually show you how to search for a CFI examiner. So you want to go to designee.faa.gov, right? And this is the official way to find yourself an examiner. And you go to find designees, and the designee type, you want a DPE, of course, right? And you want to do a designee search, not a location search. Well, you could do a location search, I guess, and you could select a state that you want to travel to. So let's say you're willing to travel to Colorado. So we're going to do a location search for Colorado, and then you want to find the correct code for the CFI examiner. And a way to do that is a DPE, and then you're going to find an FIEI ASE. So that is a flight instructor initial airplane single engine. If you just do the FIE, then that is just an examiner that can give a flight instructor like a double I, an add-on. But you want the FIEI. I forget what exactly that stands for. So that would be all that you select there, and then you hit search. And so what you should have is a list of only the examiners in Colorado that can give FIEI ASE, which is the single engine flight instructor initial. So that's how you would actually use that search tool. And looking here, let's just count in Colorado. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So there's 7 examiners in Colorado that can give that check ride. Now, if we were to search all DPE types, I'm sure there's way more than that in Colorado. So that's part of the problem that you're seeing there. But once you have those examiners, you've got their phone number and their email address there. So I would, if they've got their phone number listed, send them a text, send them an email saying, hey, I'm willing to travel to you. I'm ready. I'm signed off. I'm good to go. But yeah, I would recommend that. Try to get it done. I know it's tough. It's difficult. All right. What else do we got? John, we got another question?
We do. So let's take a look. In Discord, Ro is asking whether the following instrument rating ACS knowledge item, procedures and limitations associated with the precision approach, including determining required descent rates and adjusting minimums in the case of inoperative equipment. If you were to test this item and go past the acceptable knowledge and see where the applicant's knowledge ends, what kinds of questions would you ask?
Interesting. Okay, so let's see here. I've got this question pulled up. Let me read it for just a second and analyze and make sure I'm looking at it right. Because there's a couple things I'd like to cover here. First of all, that's a great question. I like that question. So let's go to the ACE guide, and we're looking at the instrument rating ACS knowledge topic item. So that is in 6 Kilo 1. Okay, so this is in our precision approach task. So looking at how the ACS is constructed, this doesn't always get asked, right? Because I only have to ask one knowledge topic, one risk management topic, and then you have to do all of the skills. So this task right here of knowing how to determine the required descent rate and adjusting minimums in the case of inoperative equipment, that might be tied with some sort of partial panel scenario. which is kind of interesting because if you go to the partial panel scenario, we can go over here to our Appendix 3, gives us our amplifying remarks about our partial panel, and that's in Task A. So remember, this knowledge topic was in Task B. So Task A says, hey, the non-precision has to be partial panel, not the precision approach. So this would be one of the items that would probably be covered on the ground only. I don't see this being covered in the flight because I don't do a partial panel precision approach in flight. So that could be something listed to that. Another piece of inoperative equipment that we might have is if you were going to lose DME. So if you had, DME on a non-precision approach, then you might have to do a timed approach to do that, right? But on a precision approach, I don't really see how I would work this into a reasonable scenario of you determining your required descent rate because of inoperative equipment. Because if the descent rate is just you holding the glide slope, right? If you have a glide slope, and I'm assuming you do since you're doing a precision approach, you should be able to maintain the glide slope without having to do any mental math or anything, right? Now, where I might key in on this as a knowledge topic area, and this is in my plan of action, is asking you to change the minimums because of inoperative equipment. But that inoperative equipment doesn't have anything to do with the aircraft. It has the inoperative equipment with the actual approach lighting system. So pieces of the approach lighting system being inoperative, I often throw those into the plan of action saying, okay, you read the NOTAMs for XYZ airport and you see that there's something about an ALS and the PAPI's inoperative. How is that going to affect our ability to fly the approach that you planned on flying? So if you look in the IFR digital supplement guide in the front of ForeFlight, you'll actually see that there's an inop table that's there on the digital supplement, and it tells you how much that you need to increase minimums by for different pieces of inoperative lighting equipment. And that's how I work that piece of that question into my plan of action. But to be honest, that knowledge topic one, I don't know how I would, first of all, I'm not really going to try, if you give me an intelligent answer to that question about how, well, if I'm shooting an ILS, for instance, with a tailwind, I might need 700 to 800 feet a minute than if I'm shooting an ILS with a headwind. Okay, that's pretty good knowledge of, your ground speed is going to be related to your required descent rate to maintain a glide slope. But specifically that knowledge in relation to a precision approach doesn't really make sense for how the checkride's constructed, because all of those discussions for loss of equipment in the aircraft and having to do a timed approach or something like that, that's all going to come up in Task A, which is the non-precision approach, which is where the partial panel is going to take place. That's a good question. I haven't looked at that knowledge topic that closely before, so I appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm a CFI in Baltimore, Maryland. The, question I had, someone had for me recently was the 3 hours of, sole use of reference to instruments in the private pilot requirement, those 3 hours required. Can those 3 hours, there's some similarities in the training that we provide in that. There's a lot of similarities to like what we would provide in even instrument training and the certain parts of instrument training, and even the 10 hours of quote unquote instrument training for the commercial pilot certificate. So I guess they were asking, can any of those 3 hours count toward anything else like instrument or commercial, or are they only just solely for the private?
Sure. Yeah, no, that's a great question. That gets brought up a lot. So the answer, as often the answer is it depends. And so what it depends on is your level of certification as whatever you are as an instructor. If you're a double I, if you're properly rated as a double I and you're providing the flight by sole reference to instrument, then it's actually instrument training. And you can use that to count towards the 61, 65 requirements for the instrument rating. And if it's properly logged, you could technically use that to count towards the 10 hours of commercial training. Not many people do that. I don't know anybody that do that, because you need 15 hours for your instrument, right? You need 15 hours with a double I. You need 10 hours of instrument training with a double I for your commercial. So often the question is similar but slightly different of, can I use the 15 hours I did for my instrument rating to qualify for the 10 hours of instrument training I need for my commercial rating? And the answer there is, it still depends on how you logged it. So for your specific question, yes, you could use that time towards the 15 hours of dual instrument training by a CFII for the instrument rating, as long as you yourself are a II, and I would put a note on there saying that that's actually simulated instrument time, and I'm a CFII. I would put a little note there, and you may even be able to put another note that says IAW, which is brevity code for in accordance with, and then put 6165. So anybody auditing the logbook will know, oh, that time wasn't just 61109 time, that was also 6165 time. So that must have been a II. And I can check, and yeah, sure enough, Elias is a CFII, and all that's copacetic. Now, if you're now doing instrument training, and your instrument student is going to go on and get their commercial, you want to make sure that the 15 hours of instrument training you give them double counts and counts for those 10 hours of commercial instrument training that they need. And so for that to count, there needs to be some sort of notation in the logbook. This is why digital logbooks are so great, because you can fit all of this stuff in there. But that logbook needs to say this training was in accordance with IAW 6165 and 61129. And 61129 is, of course, the commercial requirements of training that outline, hey, you need 10 hours of instrument training time done by a II. So I answered two kind of different parts of your question, but yes, the answer is simply yes, but that also that it depends. You need to make sure that you have the right instructor and that you logged it correctly.
I want to maybe raise a little bit of a flag with part of that. I don't think that training towards a private pilot rating is eligible to be used for a commercial pilot license. There's the ethereal interpretation that, as I understand, basically says that you can use it towards your current rating, but you can't train towards a future rating until you have that previous rating. And it's different with the instrument, because it's certificate, right? So you can't train towards a commercial certificate without first having the prerequisite certificate. An instrument rating is not a certificate, so you can train at the same time as a student pilot towards that instrument rating, is my understanding.
Yeah, I think you're right. So while you were talking, I pulled up the Thuralt LOI, and so Thuralt 2010. This is out of the ACE guide, and it just gives basically the subtext here or the synopsis. So furthermore, cross-country or night flights conducted during private pilot training cannot count towards commercial pilot certificate requirements, each certification level requires dedicated training. So yeah, you're right. And I think it's a moot point anyway, because you're only doing 3 hours of instrument. I don't think the Thuralt specifically calls out the time with an instructor. I think it's talking about the solo time for the cross-country. But in either case, I wouldn't recommend doing that. Don't try to bend the rules there, because you're already getting 15 hours as an instrument, and that's what this legal interpretation is saying, is that you're completely welcome to use that 15 hours of instrument training received as an instrument pilot during that training towards your commercial. So don't even try to put the private pilot in there. So I wouldn't recommend that. But yeah, thanks for bringing up that LOI. That's the whole. There's actually 2 LOIs. I don't know them off the top of my head, other than Thuralt. I don't know what the other one is. Maybe ORD. Yeah, I think it's ORD. That's it. Yeah, the ORD 2018 is the one that actually says it has to be properly logged. So if you wanted to look that LOI up, that's where you'd find that. Okay, well, we're right at an hour. I answered some questions. Can't stay too long tonight. So those that didn't get their question answered on YouTube, come over to Discord, join the Discord server, and ask your question there. I'm in Discord all week. I answer questions in there a lot. And then there's guys like Elias and John that are in here that'll probably answer it correctly before I even get to it. So we've been getting a lot of good conversations in Discord, and I just love it. I've been using Discord way more than any other social media stuff, and it seems like it's a lot more targeted. So, all right. Well, that's it for this week's show. I hope y'all join us next week, and we'll see you next time.